Jon Snow stood at the top of the Red Keep, a lone figure outlined against a sky streaked in shades of gold and pink. His dark hair, grown past his collar, fluttered in the wind that tugged with a biting chill. Despite the southern warmth, he could smell the sea salt wafting from Blackwater Bay behind him, and before him spread the labyrinth of King's Landing. The city always felt restless, never truly asleep, home to thousands and thousands of souls. He knew its corners were still haunted by ghosts, echoing the devastation of war not so long ago. Broken spires and half-rebuilt walls testified to the chaos that had swept across it. Now, in the hush that came at eventide, he surveyed the realm he was meant to rule. Westeros stretched far beyond the edges of that city, mountains and seas and plains that he had barely begun to understand. Once a bastard, always a bastard in his heart. Yet they had crowned him king in the hope he could bind the fractures that sundered the Seven Kingdoms. His cloak, black as any worn on the wall, hung heavier with every memory of his past. Even after all the revelations, his parentage, his claim, his duty, he sometimes woke expecting the icy wind of the far north to burn his lungs. Winterfell was in his blood. The Starks and their sense of honor had shaped him. He often felt that his presence in this southern capital was a temporary arrangement, like a man sleeping in a borrowed bed. The formality of a crown on his head had done little to ease the tension in his bones. If anything, it had only added weight. Yet he wore it because his people had asked him to. Because, in the darkest hour of the long night, he had fought by their side. And because, after all that had transpired, no one else truly dared claim that seat. Night was closing in, and the city below gradually shed the last vestiges of sunlight. Street after street flickered with torches and lanterns, the grand shapes of mansions and temples blending into silhouettes against the dim horizon. From where Jon stood, he could see the distant swirl of activity at the main gates, the occasional glint of metal from the golden cloaks patrolling. He let out a silent breath, as though breathing with the city itself. Every day, he felt he needed to adjust to the scale, to the pressing magnitude of ruling. In the north, life was simpler, even if it was harsher. Here, every corridor had an ear. Every corner had a scheme. And as the king's steward, Davos Seaworth, had once said, "There's no shortage of eyes in King's Landing." Jon believed it. He turned at the faint shuffle of boots against stone. Sir Davos himself, hair streaked with white, the lines of his face cut deeper by all they had endured, stepped up behind him. "Your Grace," he said, voice low and gruff as always. "The council waits." There was that tension in his eyes, the knowledge that while Jon tarried here alone, men and women of the realm expected the king's presence. Jon gave a small nod, a hand rising out of habit to the pommel of the sword at his belt. Longclaw was never far from him, as much a part of his identity now as Ghost had been. When he moved, the plain black cloak parted to reveal the simpler leathers beneath, chosen for practicality in a city that still reeled from war's destruction. He was no Lannister or Baratheon draped in finery. The people saw him that way, straight, unadorned, reluctant in the face of power. Some admired it, some criticized it. But Jon Snow knew no other way to be. Davos offered a half-smile. "Come, lad." He caught himself, parted his lips uncertainly. "Your Grace," he corrected. The old man was still getting used to formalities, and Jon could hardly blame him. Another nod passed between them before they made their way back into the corridors of the Red Keep. Warm torchlight threw dancing shadows along the ancient walls. The fortress had a darker, older spirit than many realized. It was a place that had witnessed countless kings, mad, wise, or both, rise and fall. Now it had claimed Jon Snow. They walked in silence until they reached the council chambers. Within, around a broad table with a painted map of Westeros, waited the few who trusted Jon enough to help him rule, and those who were pragmatic enough to see that the realm needed stability more than ever. At one side stood Tyrion Lannister, hand resting on the back of a carved wooden chair. Although drained by the wars and the tragedies, Tyrion's eyes still gleamed with intelligence. He had seen kings come and go. He had watched the city burn and bleed. He was bruised by it all, but unbroken. Across from him, Samwell Tarly hovered, shoulders stooped under the weight of his growing responsibilities as Grand Maester, a chain that seemed too large around his neck. Brienne of Tarth stood close by, near a window that overlooked the yard, her posture stiff as ever, sworn to protect the king as she once protected so many others. And by her side, quietly contemplative, was Sansa Stark, Lady of Winterfell no longer, but a figure of both wisdom and caution in this new age. She had come south at Jon's request, to help him navigate the murky waters of King's Landing's politics. Though the North now respected Jon as a brother and a king, Sansa was needed here. She had insight into the game that had so often stung the Stark family. She, too, wore the scars of those battles, though hers were less visible. Jon took in the faces, feeling the thrum of his heart in his ears. He could almost hear the wind of the North whispering in his mind. This was the small council that advised a Targaryen king. Yet so much had changed since the truth of his parentage came out. He was a Stark as much as he was a Targaryen. Some tried to call him Aegon Targaryen, sixth of his name. But he had insisted on keeping the name Jon Snow for official proclamations. He did not want to erase who he had been, nor did he want to dwell too heavily on the legacy of a father he never knew. People had accepted it mostly, a compromise that made sense given the realm's exhaustion. The Targaryen name still produced unease in certain corners, but Jon's reputation of honesty and self-sacrifice softened many hearts. And the presence of Rhaegal was impossible to deny, a living dragon bound to him in kinship. While the North had warily agreed to a dragon king, the rest of Westeros saw it as both a blessing and a threat. Jon's greatest challenge was to prove them wrong about that threat. He took the seat at the head of the table, removing the crown from his head and setting it gently on the polished wood. It was simpler than many that came before. Wrought iron with accents of silver, reflective of the forging that had shaped the North and the Targaryen heritage. Every time he touched it, he felt a jolt of uncertainty. How many heads had been weighed down by a crown? How many hearts corrupted by its power? Tyrion cleared his throat. "Your Grace, we've received word from the Stormlands. Gendry Baratheon's men have identified a new network of bandits harassing the supply lines. I've lost half a dozen wagons meant for our rebuilding efforts." Jon absorbed the news. They had been trying to send seeds, tools, and artisans out to the ravaged corners of the kingdom, especially to those regions still limping back from the wars. "Are there casualties?" His voice was quiet but resonated in the chamber nonetheless. "None reported yet aside from a few injuries," Tyrion replied. "But this is a setback. Without stable roads, the villagers suffer. They're already on edge after the last year's turmoil." Sansa folded her hands atop the table, her red hair aglow in the torchlight. "If we let that problem fester, it'll only embolden more outlaws. We have to be swift, yet careful. We don't want to set an army on them and provoke further chaos." "And Brienne nodded in agreement, her jaw clenching. "We could dispatch a contingent of loyal men, small enough not to appear as an invasion, but large enough to put an end to these raids." Davos chimed in. "We'll need a commander who knows the terrain. Someone Gendry trusts. Most roads in the Stormlands wind along forested paths or jagged cliff edges. An ill-prepared unit will suffer more losses than they prevent." Jon listened, turning his gaze from face to face. His mind flicked back to his own time as a commander. He thought of how he used to manage threats beyond the wall with the Night's Watch, and how sometimes a smaller, more strategic approach was better than overwhelming force. "We'll send a detachment from the Crown's Guard with orders to cooperate with Gendry's men. They'll quell the raids and protect those roads until the shipments are delivered." Tyrion spread his hands in a gesture of assent. "I'll see that the orders are drawn up." He paused, glanced around the table. "Shall we turn next to the matter of the Iron Islands? There is still tension regarding Yara's nominal independence. She's kept her fleets well away from trouble, but there's talk that she wants formal recognition of her autonomy." Ned. The king's heart clenched slightly. He remembered promising the Iron Islands that they could choose their own path in the wake of the war against the dead. But the politics of a fractured Westeros were not so easily navigated. "They stood with us in the long night," Jon said. "We should respect their desire to rule themselves, especially if they remain allies. But we cannot do so blindly. We need trade, free passages. We need open ports so supplies can cross from the mainland to the islands. He ran a hand through his hair, thinking, I'll speak with Yara personally. She'll find an audience with me here if she wishes it. So, the session went on, and the candlelight burned lower, illuminating tired eyes and worn faces. The day was not done, not by far. By the time Tyrion had enumerated the troubles in the Reach, lords left landless by the fighting, alliances made and broken, Jon felt the ache in his shoulders. Yet these were the tasks expected of a ruler. He remembered how Daenerys once spoke of breaking the wheel. Now he wondered if the wheel was truly broken, or merely spinning in a new direction, with new cogs biting at its edges. He fought his own doubts. Better him than some tyrant, he told himself. Better me than no one. When the meeting concluded, Sam gave Jon a small scroll, some note from Old Town about the restoration of Grand Maesters in various seats. Then the king departed with Sansa and Davos through the corridors, heading toward his private chambers. But as they passed an archway, the night air drifting in, Jon caught a familiar rumble overhead, a sound that could not be mistaken for wind or thunder. He held up a hand to still his companions. They looked upward, all three of them seeing the shadow that flickered across the sliver of moon. Another shape soared across the sky, wide and graceful, the silhouette of wings unearthly in the darkness. Torchlight below glimmered off scales. Rhaegal. Too. Jon felt the corner of his mouth quirk up in what might be his closest approximation of a smile. Even this far south, Rhaegal followed him, always watching, always close. The Green Dragon had grown more since the victory over the Night King. He had carried Jon on flights across the spires of Winterfell, over the shimmering rivers near River Run, and finally above the broken walls of King's Landing. The bond they shared was still something Jon could scarcely believe, but it was also one of the few times he felt truly free. High above the clouds, the burdens of the crown dissolved for a breath, for a moment, until he landed again to face the mortal realm's heavy demands. Sansa gazed upward with a mixture of awe and trepidation, her posture stiffening. He likes to remind us he's near, she said softly. Even she had not grown fully accustomed to the presence of a dragon, but she knew it was essential for Yon's claim, and for the kingdom's safety. The same beast that might trouble their subjects also served as a powerful deterrent to any who would challenge the fragile peace. Davos let out a sigh, glancing at Jon. Your Grace, I suggest you retire soon. You've another council session in the morning, and lords from the Westerlands arriving midday. Jon nodded, but did not make any promises he could not keep. He parted ways with them, instructing Sansa to rest well, and Davos to see to his own health. The older man had served valiantly through multiple wars, and deserved more than endless hours in council. Then, alone, Jon strode out into the keep's courtyard, stepping down the wide stone stairs, crossing to the gate that opened into the fields below the city's high walls. The guards at the gate recognized him and let him pass without question. Outside, the air was crisper, even if it still carried the warmth of the south compared to the north's biting cold. He found a patch of ground beyond the walls, where battered earth had been churned by many feet, some used for training, some for storing supplies. And it was there that Rhaegal descended, stirring the dust with a gust of wind from his massive wings. Jon held out a gloved hand, and the dragon's long neck bent low, shimmering green in the moonlight. Rhaegal's eyes glowed a haunting gold, and there was a low rumble in his throat that resonated through Jon's entire body. He stepped closer, pressing a palm to the dragon's scaled flank. The heat radiating from Rhaegal was like stepping too near a bonfire. Jon murmured softly, a habit he had fallen into. Easy boy, though he was uncertain of the words. He spoke as he once did to Ghost, or as he might soothe a frightened horse, yet Rhaegal was neither of those. This was an ancient power, a living symbol of fire made flesh. Still, Rhaegal lowered his head in acceptance, nostrils flaring. A quiet exhalation. He could not help but remember Daenerys in such moments. Her first time in the sky, how she believed so fervently that the dragons were the key to a better future. They were children to her in many ways, Jon had not shared that bond of mother and child, but in the forging of their closeness, he had come to love them as one might love a loyal companion. Thought of Daenerys still hurt. She had believed in her destiny, had believed in him. In the end, the tragedy of her final days cast a long shadow. He seldom spoke of it. Tyrion sometimes sought him out to discuss what had happened, but Jon rarely provided more than a solemn nod. The memories were too bitter, but Rhaegal was a reminder. A piece of her that remained, a gift she had left behind, even after everything went wrong. With another rumble, the dragon set to pacing around Jon, tail swishing in the dust. He was restless. Jon sensed the creature wanted to take flight again, to roam the skies free of constraints, free of the city's stone and the watchers who gaped at him like a monster. Sometimes Jon simply stood there and let Rhaegal's presence wash over him, as if the dragon's magic could grant him a moment of clarity. Above, the stars were bright, scattered in a velvet expanse. He breathed in, tasting the night on his tongue, and realized that once more he was stalling, avoiding the bedchamber and the nightmares it held. Being king meant no escape from the day's burdens, not even in slumber. The weight was always there. He murmured to Rhaegal, "I'll come see you soon. If you want to hunt, go. I'll not hold you here." His tone was soft. He had no illusions that he commanded the dragon. It was more a partnership, a fragile thread of trust. With a roar that startled the dozing guards on the walls, Rhaegal spread his wings, and in two great beats he rose into the sky. Dust swirled, stinging Jon's eyes, and he raised an arm to shield his face. When he lowered it again, Rhaegal was already a silhouette in the darkness, a creature of shadow and moonlight, leaving Jon alone on the quiet field. Back through the gate, back into the Red Keep, he found his chambers lit by a single brazier. He dismissed the attendants who hovered, offering wine or to warm a bath. He wanted none of it. Alone, he let Longclaw rest by the bedside, removed his cloak and leathers. The bed was bigger than any he'd known at Winterfell, large enough to swallow him, draped in furs that reminded him of the north. He tugged at his boots, recalling an evening not so long ago, when he was simply the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Then everything changed with a letter, with a revelation, with the face of a dragon queen. Now, ironically, he had everything he never asked for: a throne, a crown, a realm to shepherd. He sat on the edge of the bed and closed his eyes. Images darted through his mind of the White Walker's approach, of the desperate stand at Winterfell, of the heartbreak he endured afterward. He heard the echoes of spectral roars, felt the sting of betrayal, the hush of regret. Once his watch had ended, or so he believed. Yet here he was, still watching, still worrying over the safety of the living. With a heavy exhalation, he sank back. Sleep came in fitful snatches, haunted by fleeting shapes, half-forgotten promises, and faintly, the swish of dragons' wings. Dawn arrived sooner than he would have liked, with pale light peeking over the city's rooftops. Its golden glow fell across the rubble of war-torn districts and new scaffolds rising to rebuild. In the sky, small birds wheeled about, scattering into the day. The Red Keep gradually awakened, and servants moved through the halls, their footsteps echoing. Jon forced himself out of bed, rolling his shoulders, trying to ease the stiffness from an unrestful night. He splashed his face with water from a basin, feeling its cold shock jolt him awake. The reflection in the water hardly felt familiar. The lines around his eyes had deepened, a tension that rarely left him now. Still, he was young for a king, younger than many who preceded him. Some days he felt older than time. He dressed more formally today, mindful that lords from the Westerlands were expected. Sansa had urged him to make a certain impression, regal, authoritative, but not arrogant. He managed a tunic of black, embroidered with the Stark direwolf and the Targaryen dragon entwined. A new sigil, carefully crafted by the seamstresses, an acknowledgement of his parentage. He had not liked the idea at first, feeling it too brazen, but Sansa insisted they show unity. So the silver wolf and red dragon curled around each other, an uneasy alliance sewn in thread. Over this, he wore a dark mantle pinned at his shoulder, and at last accepted the crown placed in his hand by a waiting attendant. He He did not put it on just yet. He would do so in the throne room, for the benefit of formality. He was a reluctant actor on a stage he never wanted, but an actor nonetheless. As he made his way to the throne room, the sound of his own footsteps rang in his ears. Memory flashed in his mind of that hall in the aftermath of Daenerys' conquest. The Iron Throne had stood there like a twisted skeleton of swords. So many had died in its name. So many had tried to claim it. In the end, the monarchy had passed to him, not by the sword, but by the pleadings of those who believed he could unite the realm, after the war, after the tragedy. That thought sometimes made him want to laugh bitterly. But duty was duty. He could not shirk it. Inside the throne room, the darkness of the long hall was broken by columns of light streaming through tall windows. The floor had been swept spotless, the cracked columns repaired or replaced. New banners hung from the rafters, a testament to the new reign. Lords and ladies gathered in small clusters, quietly speaking among themselves. At the far end waited the Iron Throne, no longer as monstrous and intimidating as it once was. Much of it had been melted or damaged in the madness that ended the last war. Over months of painstaking labor, it was reforged. A simpler seat of swords, still forged from the blades of conquest, but hammered into a shape that was less a jagged terror. It remained a symbol of power, but one with softened edges, as if the realm itself wanted to forget the extremes of the past. Tyrion stood near it, wearing a dark doublet with the hand of the kingpin gleaming at his breast. He inclined his head to Jon. Courtiers, knights, and visiting lords turned to look as well, and Jon felt their stares. He strode down the length of the throne room, footsteps echoing off the marble floor, trying to hide the tug of anxiety that dogged him. When he reached the throne, he paused, lifting the crown in his hand. A hush fell. Quietly, as if performing a rite he only half understood, he settled the crown atop his head. Then he turned and gestured for all to rise, though many had already done so. Before proceedings began, a herald announced the arrival of the Westerland lords, men who had once followed the Lannisters unquestioningly, but now found themselves without a strong figurehead. Kevan Lannister, a distant cousin of Tyrion, stepped forward, flanked by a small retinue. He had the leonine features common to their house, though his bearing was less proud, more weary. The past few years had worn them all down. Kevan's once rich clothes were dusty from travel, his face lined by the glare of the morning sun. He greeted Jon formally, bowing low. The rest followed suit in a ripple of movement. "Your Grace," Kevan said, voice quavering slightly but regaining steadiness. "The Westerlands pledged their loyalty to the crown." He rose, clearing his throat. "We understand the hardships that have befallen all of us, and we come to discuss matters of taxation, trade, and rebuilding. Lannisport is in dire need of support. The mines yield less gold than in the past, and the war took a heavy toll on our farmland. We fear for the winter harvest." Jon inclined his head. "I hear your concerns, Lord Lannister. Your homeland has seen enough bloodshed, as has all of Westeros. We want to ensure no region suffers in isolation. That is why we've begun distributing resources across the realm as best we can. We'll meet with my advisors and find a compromise that benefits both the crown and the Westerlands." He scanned the retinue, reading the uncertainty in their expressions. Many of them had lost relatives in the final battles. Their loyalty was more caution than admiration, but for now, it was enough. Tyrion stepped up, hands tucked behind his back. "We'll convene with you this afternoon. I believe we have some proposals that may lighten the burdens on trade routes through the Westerlands. We'd be interested to hear your suggestions as well." Net. Satisfied with that, the lords bowed once more and took their place among the gathering. The session carried on, with various men and women bringing forth requests, petitions, and issues from their corners of the realm. Jon listened intently, occasionally deferring to Tyrion's more practiced tongue, or to Sansa's quieter wisdom when she stepped forward. When a dispute arose between two minor lords about land boundaries, Jon tried to mediate, recalling the fair judgments Ned Stark had taught him in childhood. But there was always that feeling that, whatever decision he made, someone would walk away displeased. The best he could do was ensure that displeasure did not ferment into rebellion. By midday, a break was called. The large doors swung open, letting in fresh air. Pendants came with water, wine, and simple fare of bread, cheese, and roasted meat. Jon found Tyrion leaning against a pillar, swirling wine in a silver goblet, looking thoughtful. The dwarf caught Jon's eye and raised a brow. "Not as easy as swinging a sword at a White Walker, is it?" Jon shook his head, wearing the ghost of a smile. "Nothing ever is." He felt the dryness in his throat, and waved away an attendant who offered him wine. Instead, he took a water skin and drank deeply. The dryness extended to his lips, and he felt the slight burn of them cracking from tension. "I miss the North. Simpler, in some ways." Tyrion eyed him. "You'd rather be off in Winterfell, letting some other poor soul handle all this." Jon shrugged and looked away. "I only want to do what's best. I never craved power." Tyrion's voice softened. "That's why you were chosen, because you didn't seek it, because you haven't let it corrupt you." He paused, glancing around at the swirl of courtiers. "Just be careful you don't let it crush you either." Jon set his jaw, appreciating the concern but uncertain how to respond. The memory of Daenerys's final days haunted him. How quickly that lust for power and liberation twisted into something darker. He closed his eyes briefly. "I'll try." They returned to the hall shortly after, continuing until the sun had drifted past its zenith and slanted golden across the floor. Finally, the session concluded, and the lords dispersed, some with hopeful glints in their eyes, others still harboring suspicion. Jon could not control how they felt, only how he governed. But the day's routine had not ended. There were letters to write, messages to dispatch, and the news from the Stormlands to address. The hours passed in a weary swirl of tasks, forging the foundations of a reign that felt more precarious than he dared show. Late in the afternoon, he found a moment to stand on a balcony overlooking Blackwater Bay, the waters shimmering like hammered bronze beneath the lowering sun. He rested his forearms on the balustrade. The breeze toyed with his dark hair. On the horizon, he saw ships anchored, supply vessels and merchant galleys from Essos, maybe. The city's future might depend on forging new ties across the narrow sea. He was not blind to that necessity. Yet he remembered the last time a Targaryen reached across those waters, and how that ended. Davos approached quietly, as he often did, stepping to Jon's side. The older man gazed out at the ships as well, rubbing the whiskers on his chin. "Your Grace, we have the latest tallies for the harvest in the Crown Lands. Seems the yield might be better than expected." Jon nodded. "Good. That might help feed the small folk through the winter, if we prepare well. Set some aside for the Stormlands too, if the bandits keep interfering with shipments." "Dai. Aye," Davos answered. "I'll see to it." He hesitated, glancing at Jon. "You look tired, lad. I might suggest you get some fresh air beyond these walls. Maybe take Rhaegal for a flight?" The last suggestion held a glimmer of the smuggler's wry humor. Jon exhaled. "Might be the only time I feel somewhat free," he admitted quietly. "But the realm's demands never cease." "True enough," Davos said, placing a hand on the king's shoulder. "But a man who cannot pause to breathe will soon find himself drowned." He gave Jon's shoulder a reassuring squeeze before withdrawing. "I'll handle what I can." Jon took the advice to heart. At dusk, just as the city's lights began to awaken in the creeping twilight, he made his way back to the clearing outside the walls. The guards again let him pass unchallenged. This time, Rhaegal was already waiting, perched on a low, rocky outcrop, tail swaying idly. The dragon's keen senses must have felt Jon's approach, for he lifted his massive head, snorting puffs of warm air. Jon approached slowly, heart thrumming in his chest. He felt that strange mix of awe and calm that always accompanied these encounters. He placed his hand upon the scaled flank. Rhaegal's warmth sank into his palm, and the rumble in the dragon's chest vibrated through Jon's bones. Without further hesitation, Jon climbed onto the dragon's back, settling carefully between the ridges. He had grown more accustomed to this, though it still felt precarious, as if at any moment he might slip and plummet. But Rhaegal tensed, gathering power in his haunches, and with a thunderous beat of wings, they lurched skyward. The rush of air seized Jon's breath, and the ground shrank beneath him. The Red Keep's towers slipping away like child's toys. Another thrust of the mighty wings, and they soared above the high walls, above the city rooftops, catching the last glimmer of the sun's dying rays. The wind whipped through Jon's hair, tugging at the cloak he still wore. The city spread out beneath them, dotted with lights, so many lives continuing in their little corners. He felt that old rush of adrenaline, a mixture of terror and freedom. He guided Rhaegal gently with his knees, leaning forward as they circled the top of Aegon's high hill, once home to the Targaryen conquest. It struck Jon that he was the heir to that conquest, forging a new path, or trying to. A swirl of emotions crowded his chest. This was all so strange. But in the same heartbeat, he welcomed the moment of exhilaration. Higher they climbed, up into the purple glow of early night, where the air turned cold. Jon's cheeks stung with it, but he relished the coolness, reminding him of the north. In that hush, only the rush of wind and the thunder of Rhaegal's wings existed. Jon looked to the horizon, seeing how the land rolled into darkness, the faint glow of distant hamlets scattered like stars on the ground. It humbled him to think of the thousands who looked to him for guidance, who needed a steady hand. This was his vow now, to protect them, to bring peace where there had been war. He patted Rhaegal's side, urging the dragon gently downward. They glided out over the black water, the waves rippling far below, reflecting the moon's pale face. The salty wind hit Jon's nostrils, mingling with the dragon's smoky scent. He felt the tension in his spine ease. If only for a short time. Rhaegal banked, turning back toward the city. Each wing beat was like a drum roll in Jon's chest. The dragon's powerful muscles shifted beneath him, and for a heartbeat, Jon could not help but imagine what onlookers in King's Landing might think. Seeing a lone dragon in the night sky. The roar was quieter now, but still present, a promise of might. When at last they landed again in the fields beyond the gates, the dust swirled around them. Jon carefully dismounted, legs unsteady, adrenaline still coursing. Rhaegal's eyes gleamed, as though the creature was aware of the respite he'd given his rider. Jon rested a hand along the dragon's side once more. A bond, however precarious, existed between them, each step forging trust. Sometimes he wished he could share words with Rhaegal, to ask him how it felt to be one of the last dragons in the world, to ask him if he missed Daenerys too. But that was a fool's fancy. The language they shared was simpler and more honest than words. Guards stood at a distance, weapons in hand but lowered. They were still nervous about the presence of a dragon so close to their city walls, but they had orders to allow the king his movements. Jon gave them a curt nod as he returned. Dusk had firmly settled over King's Landing, the sky deepening to an inky blue. Torches lit the path back into the Red Keep. He caught glimpses of wide-eyed onlookers, small folk who'd risked a glance beyond the walls. Whispers would run through the city by morning. The king flew again. The dragon soared above them. Some would be in awe, some in fear, perhaps. But they would talk, and the legend of Jon Snow, the reluctant Targaryen king, would grow. Inside, the keep's corridors glimmered with lanterns. He felt Sansa's watchful gaze from across the courtyard as he passed. She gave him a small nod, acknowledging both the wonder and the burden that she knew too well. They exchanged few words, but the silent understanding passed between them, like a current of northern bond. She wanted him to succeed, to endure, to hold the realm together and protect their family. He wanted the same, though at times he wondered if he had the strength. He retreated once again to his chambers, feeling the weariness settle into his limbs. The flight had granted him a brief reprieve, but the day's labors remained. A stack of scrolls on a table reminded him that a king's tasks never sleep. Summoning the last of his focus, he sat down, unrolled one parchment after another, scanning the pleas from distant corners of Westeros, reading the names of families who needed help, reading the demands of lords who sought favor, reading the faint hopes hidden between lines of polite script. He signed where he could, made notes for his counsel on others. Hour upon hour passed, and the candle's flame danced lower, wax dripping onto the desk. His eyes stung from reading in the dim light, yet he continued, Determined to see at least some of it done, he paused only when a memory flared. Of himself as a boy, at Winterfell, trying to read by candlelight, determined to keep pace with his true-born siblings. A quiet pang of nostalgia pierced him. Where had that simpler life gone? At last, near midnight, he set aside the final scroll, rubbed the ache at the back of his neck, and prepared to sleep. The flicker of a candle played tricks on his vision, casting shapes on the walls. He extinguished it carefully. Through the window, the distant roar of Rhaegal was just audible, echoing across the city. A soft pang of reassurance coursed through Jon's chest at that sound. He closed his eyes, letting the darkness enfold him. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more counsels, more tests of his resolve. But for now, for the space of a single night, he was simply Jon Snow, alone in his bedchamber, haunted by memories, comforted by the presence of the dragon who was kin to him in blood and spirit. He did not dream of the Great War, nor of betrayal, nor of the chilling blue eyes of the undead for once. Instead, a faint warmth visited him, like a golden memory of summer's day in the north, or the lingering impression of wings overhead. If it was a sign, he could not say. If it was hope, it was all he had. And for that moment, he held on to it with all his silent strength. Oh, Anandi. Morning came softly, touching the edges of the city with the palest gold. Jon woke to the distant clamor of workmen carrying beams, shouting instructions to one another as they added another patch of scaffolding along the Red Keep's outer walls. There was a faint ache behind his eyes, the remnant of a restless sleep crowded with half-remembered dreams. He pulled himself upright and let the furs slide from his shoulders. The night's cool air lingered on his skin, and he took a slow breath to steady himself, gathering his thoughts for another day of endless tasks. He dressed in the quiet of his chamber, methodical in the way he belted his leathers, strapped on his boots, and brushed the wrinkles from a dark tunic. He chose a simpler garb this day, leaving the embroidered sigil of Stark and Targaryen for more formal audiences. In the antechamber, a young steward stood waiting with a basin of warm water. Jon washed his hands, murmuring thanks, wishing he remembered the lad's name. He resolved to ask soon, though he wondered if so many small courtesies might ever be possible with so many new faces swirling through the keep. He stepped out into the corridor. The vaulted ceilings rose overhead, lit by slender windows high in the walls. Already the Red Keep's corridors were stirring with activity, servants hurrying to prepare the hall for breakfast, guards changing shifts, officials readying scrolls and ledgers for the day's business. Jon found himself greeted by a handful of people, each bowing or curtsying. He offered quiet nods in return, uncertain if he would ever fully embrace the constant deference. He missed Winterfell's simpler etiquette, but there was no going back to a life unbound by crowns. He made his way toward the council chambers, passing a narrow courtyard where a fountain trickled with water. 2 sparrows took flight as he walked by, startled from the edge of the basin. Jon paused a moment, feeling the morning sun on his face, then moved on. He was nearly at the threshold of the council room when a voice called his name. Sansa caught up to him, her skirts whispering against the stone floor. She seemed composed as always, but the faint lines of concern in her brow told him she had begun her own day with a litany of matters to address. In truth, Sansa's presence was one of the few things that steadied him in this southern capital. She had become adept at the game here more swiftly than he ever had. He slowed his pace so she could walk beside him. Her voice was low as she spoke, mindful of any ears that might lurk. "Jon, we've received letters from several of the great lords. One from the Vale suggests they feel overlooked. Another from Yara Greyjoy herself, asking when you might grant her an audience." She hesitated, glancing at him. "And one from Bran." He paused, turning to her in mild surprise. "What does he write?" "He mentioned some disturbance on the far side of the wall." Her eyes flickered. "I'm not sure of the details. He says he's seen glimpses of strange movements in his visions. Nothing as dire as before. No sign of the dead. But he suggests we remain watchful. A large gathering of free folk near the Frostfangs, perhaps, though the letter is a little cryptic." Jon nodded slowly. Bran had become something of a solitary figure in Winterfell, seldom leaving the Godswood, deep in the mysteries of the old magic. Jon sometimes felt as though his brother existed in a realm beyond normal understanding. Still, he trusted Bran's warnings. We'll keep that in mind. First, let's deal with the immediate concerns. He pressed his lips together. We'll see to the Vale's complaints, and I'll send word to Yara at once. I won't delay that. Sansa studied his face, her blue eyes quietly assessing. She gave a single nod. All right, we'll arrange it. They slipped into the council chamber. Tyrion was there already, leaning over the table, scanning a sheaf of parchments. Samwell Tarly stood by his side, offering some commentary, though the slump of his shoulders suggested the weight of his duties as Grand Maester. Davos waited in the corner, arms folded, casting occasional glances at the large map of Westeros painted across the table's surface. Brienne, clad in polished armor, was stationed near the door, watchful and silent. Jon joined them without ceremony. Tyrion looked up, raising an eyebrow in greeting. "Your Grace," he said, voice edged with mild irony. Then he tapped the parchments. "We have news from Gendry in the Stormlands. Our men joined his, as you commanded, to deal with the bandits. They've had some success driving them off, but there's still a main group entrenched in the hills. Gendry's requesting either more men or a more direct approach." "That, sir." Jon rested his hands on the back of a chair, leaning forward. He thought of Gendry's earnest face, still youthful in some ways, but tempered by recent events. "We can't spare an army, not yet. We need stability here too. A direct approach might be what's required, but we must avoid unnecessary bloodshed." He glanced at Davos. "You know Gendry well. Your thoughts?" Davos shifted his weight. "He's a good lad. Doesn't lack for courage. But he's new to commanding men, and the Stormlands are full of hidden crags and thick forests. The bandits can vanish quick as ghosts. It might be wise to dispatch a few of our best trackers. If we find their stronghold, we can handle them with minimal force." "Nan." Jon gave a small nod. "We'll do that. I'll speak to the captain of the Crown's Guard. See that he sends men with experience in covert operations. And let Gendry know to coordinate with them." Tyrion made a note on one of the parchments. "Understood. I'll write to Gendry today." He cleared his throat, turning to Sam. "Now about the matter of the Crown's finances. Sam, you mentioned some proposals from Old Town that might help bolster our coffers without overtaxing the small folk." "Nanin?" Sam scratched his chin, looking a bit flushed. "Yes. Maesters have studied the current trade flows. They suggest that if we establish official way stations for grain shipments, we can reduce the chaos along the major roads. Merchants can sell their goods at fair rates, and the Crown can collect a nominal fee. It's less burdensome than a broad tax, and it might encourage trade to flourish again rather than pushing it into black markets." "Many sal." Jon liked the sound of that, though he knew every measure would face resistance from some corner. "Sounds fair. We'll need to ensure those way stations are secure. No bribery, no intimidation. The roads must be protected. Otherwise, it becomes just another point of corruption." Brienne lifted her chin. "I could assign some of my sworn knights to travel with the inspectors. They're honorable men. They'll keep the station holders honest." "One." Jon gave her a grateful look. "Do that, then." There was a lull as each person in the room considered their tasks. The flicker of torches around the chamber cast dancing shadows on the map. Jon reached for a small scroll. Sansa slid toward him. "From Yara Greyjoy," she said quietly. Jon broke the seal and read the contents. The letter was brief, Yara's tone direct. She asked for a meeting in King's Landing, or anywhere Jon preferred, to formalize the Iron Islands' status. She reminded him of their arrangement made in the days when Daenerys was still alive, that if the Ironborn fought against the undead, they would be granted autonomy. Yara sought to hold him to that promise. He turned the parchment over in his hands. "I want to honor the agreement," he said, his voice firm. "They fought at our side. That matters." Tyrion studied him thoughtfully. "Westeros is in no position to wage another war. If the Iron Islands want to remain part of the realm informally, but govern themselves, perhaps that's a fair price for peace. The question is, how will the other lords react, seeing a region peel away with the king's blessing?" "Bairn," Sansa folded her arms. Some might demand the same. The North already fought for independence once. Dorne might raise its old banners for sovereignty if they sensed the crown is granting easy outs. Jon inhaled slowly. He knew the dangers. This has to be handled carefully. We could allow the Iron Islands to govern themselves but remain under a loose fealty. They share in our defense, and the crown can rely on their fleets in times of war. In return, we don't meddle in their local laws. For many, it won't look much different from what they already had. But it will be recognized officially. Namtatrater. Sam nodded. That's close to how Dorne once operated, as a principality. It joined the Seven Kingdoms later, but for a time, it kept many of its own customs and rules. Davos cleared his throat. We might try to spin it as a special concession in recognition of their help during the war, and as a mark of your honor, your grace. He paused, giving Jon a measured look. Though not everyone will see it so charitably. Jon exhaled. I'll meet with her. I'd rather do it here, under controlled circumstances. If it goes well, we'll have an official alliance. If it doesn't, he shook his head, we'll address that when the time comes. Tyrion made another note. I'll send a raven to Yara. They finished up the day's main agenda, each taking on tasks that needed immediate attention. Jon dismissed them, but as Sansa moved to leave, he asked her to remain. Once they were alone in the dimly lit chamber, he looked at her with concern. How are you faring here, truly? It can't be easy. She lowered her gaze for a moment. Fingers interlinked. I manage. This city holds memories that haunt me still, but at least now I have some sense of control. And you? She glanced up, eyes steady. Every day I see how heavy this weighs on you, Jon. He took a measured breath. It's hard, Sansa. Harder than I imagined. But I'll endure it for as long as the realm needs me to. I only hope my decisions don't lead us into more bloodshed. You're doing well, she said, placing a hand on his arm. Better than most. Better than many who have sat on that throne. He gave a slight dip of his head, appreciating the reassurance. They parted ways, and Jon found himself once again strolling through the winding corridors. By midday, he made his way to the solar used for smaller audiences. The Westerland lords who had arrived the day before were gathered there with Tyrion. They delved into details about trade routes, shipments of precious metals, and how to ensure fair taxes. Jon tried to keep up with the intricacies, careful to consider each point. Tyrion guided the discussion, deploying his sharp wit and knowledge of the region's finances. If these lords had illusions of regaining the opulence House Lannister once enjoyed, they would find themselves facing pragmatic realities instead. Hours passed, the sunlight in the solar, shifting from bright midday to a softer honeyed glow of late afternoon. At last, the Westerland representatives departed, looking a mix of relieved and cautious. Jon leaned back in his seat, rotating his shoulders to ease the tension. Tyrion poured himself a half cup of wine, swirling it pensively. They want to restore the Lannister name to its old glory, the dwarf remarked, but they're forced to accept the new order. Not all of them are happy about it. You can be sure some will harbor resentment. Jon gave a low hum of acknowledgement. I'm not here to pander to their pride. If I'm to remain king, it's for the good of the realm, not for the honor of any one family's legacy. Tyrion's eyes crinkled at the edges, as though he approved. Wise words. He paused, then sipped the wine. How do you find the weight of it so far, truly? You rarely speak your thoughts. Oh. Jon dropped his gaze, taking in the swirl of dust motes in the amber light. I feel tested. Every decision is a blade that might cut me if I slip. But I keep going. He looked up. Is that enough? For now, Tyrion said gently. The realm is exhausted. Your earnestness is a balm, if a precarious one. We just need to keep bandaging the wounds until they can truly heal. A servant knocked quietly at the door. Your Grace, Lord Davos requests your presence in the courtyard. There's something you should see. Do you mean? Jon exchanged a glance with Tyrion, a flicker of curiosity passing between them. Rising from his chair, he draped his cloak over one shoulder and followed the servant. Tyrion tagged along, finishing his wine in a quick gulp. They wound through the corridors until they reached the large courtyard near the stables. Warm evening light slanted over training dummies and straw-strewn ground, picking out details in the worn stone walls. There, Davos stood with a group of guards, all facing a newcomer. The man looked as if he'd been on the road for weeks. Dusty cloak, frayed tunic, a face baked by sun and wind. He had a haunted look about him, eyes darting nervously around the courtyard. When he saw Jon approach, he fell to one knee, voice trembling. "Your Grace, I've come from a village near Rosby." Jon stepped closer. "Rise. What brings you all this way?" The man got to his feet, swallowing hard. "Bandits. Not the same as in the Stormlands. These are different, organized, armed. They come in the night, torch our storehouses. They steal what little we have. The local lord can't protect us. He's short on men after everything. We heard the king was looking to restore order." He hesitated, glancing at the ground. "I took it upon myself to come here. Please, we need help." Jon studied him. Another pocket of chaos. Another place in need. "You've done well to come," he said, voice steady. "We'll investigate. I can't promise an army, but I'll send enough men to deal with these raiders." The man's relief was visible in the sag of his shoulders. He opened his mouth, as though searching for more words, but tears threatened his composure. Jon placed a hand on his shoulder, gently urging him toward the guards. "Get him food, clean clothes, let him rest." He glanced at Davos. "We'll have to stretch our forces further." Davos exhaled through his nose. Seems the realm is riddled with men who see no better way to feed themselves than taking from others. Too many orphans of war, too many unemployed soldiers turned rogue." Jon nodded grimly. "We'll root them out where we can, but we can't be everywhere at once." He turned to Tyrion. "Add this to our agenda tomorrow. We need a cohesive strategy for dealing with these bandit outbreaks. We can't just chase each group separately." "Then I don't know." Tyrion's brow furrowed. "It may require establishing some kind of crown-funded militia in each region, small but swift enough to respond before things worsen." Jon filed that idea away, already imagining the complexities. Another burden, another challenge. Yet he said simply, "We'll see to it." He lingered in the courtyard after the man had been led away. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with soft pink and orange. A breeze rattled the dry leaves of a nearby tree. Jon's thoughts drifted to Rhaegal, wondering if the dragon roamed the skies now, or dozed by some rocky outcrop. He decided to look for him, ignoring the tug of countless duties for a brief sliver of peace. It felt like days had passed since his last flight, though it had only been the previous evening. Excusing himself from Tyrion and Davos, he walked beyond the Red Keep's walls. Once again, the guards admitted him with little more than a cautious glance. Outside, the field spread, dusty and marked by the signs of training, but empty of a dragon. Jon gazed upward, scanning the sky for a familiar silhouette. A passing patrol rode by, saluting him, and he returned a slight nod. He considered whistling, but it felt ridiculous to summon a dragon, as one might a dog. Rhaegal would appear if he wished. He paced toward a ridge where a few gnarled trees clung to rocky soil. Shadows lengthened. He caught a flicker of movement above and stiffened, heart pounding. Rhaegal soared into view, a great sweep of emerald scales in the fading light. The dragon circled once, then descended, landing in a swirl of dust. Jon braced himself against the gust of wind. Rhaegal's long neck curved, golden eyes fixed on him. A deep rumble passed from the creature's throat, and Jon stepped forward. He lifted a hand, letting Rhaegal's snout press against it. Heat radiated from the scales, and the smoky scent of dragon breath surrounded him. It grounded Jon in a way nothing else could. He could sense, in the silent communication, that Rhaegal was restless, wanting the freedom of the open skies. Jon murmured softly, a smile touching his lips. "We'll go soon." He wasn't certain if the words meant now or another day, but the promise felt important. By the time he returned to the Red Keep, the sun had sunk below the horizon. Torchlight flickered in braziers along the ramparts. Stepping back inside was like stepping into a different world. a realm of whispered politics and pressing obligations. He made his way to the banquet hall, where a modest evening meal had been arranged. Some of the court was already seated at long tables, sampling roasted game and fresh bread. Music played softly from a corner where a handful of musicians plucked strings and tapped drums. Jon's appetite was not strong, but he forced himself to eat, to show presence among his people, letting them see their king was not aloof or absent. Tyrion joined him after a time, picking at a plate of stewed vegetables. All these supplies from the Reach, the dwarf mused between bites. I'd almost forgotten what fresh produce tastes like. You should have seen it when the city was under siege years ago. People were surviving on rats, or worse. Now we dine like princes. Minahan. Jon glanced at his own plate, mostly untouched. I've known hunger. It never really leaves you, even when the table is full. Tyrion took a sip of wine, nodding in thoughtful agreement. Even so, we must remain grateful. The city's scars run deep, but each day we push forward is a small victory. Sansa sat nearby, conversing with Sam about the progress of library repairs within the keep. Brienne was at another table, but her gaze strayed often to Jon, ensuring no threat lurked. Davos drifted in and out, exchanging words with knights who had served with him in the war. When the meal ended, the hall gradually emptied, courtiers and visiting lords drifting off to whatever amusements or rest they pursued. Jon excused himself, wishing them all good night. Long days bled into nights with little respite. He climbed a winding staircase to the royal apartments. From one of the windows, he caught a glimpse of Rhaegal's dark shape gliding across the moonlit sky. It stirred an ache in his chest, a longing for that sense of liberation. Shaking off the urge to immediately rush outside, he continued to his chambers. There, by the fire's glow, he found a small stack of letters waiting, no end to them. He took a seat, letting the heat of the fire warm his hands, and unrolled the first. It was from Arya, who roamed the lands beyond Westeros. She rarely wrote more than a few lines, but the letter made him smile in its concise irreverence. She was alive, well, sailing with some brave sea captain to explore distant coasts. He set that aside with quiet relief. The next was from a minor lord of the Crown Lands, requesting an audience to petition for funds to rebuild a fallen keep. Another from the Vale, reiterating their complaints. Another from a merchant guild in Pentos, offering a favorable deal if the crown would lift certain tariffs. He rubbed at his eyes. The avalanche of demands never ceased, a swirl of wants and needs that threatened to bury him. Yet each had to be addressed, lest they accumulate into discontent that could spark rebellion. He took a quill, jotted notes, tried to craft responses. A flicker of memory intruded on his focus. The wall, the howling wind, the vow that had once guided his every action. Night gathers, and now my watch begins. He never truly left that watch behind. He had vowed to protect the realm, and no oath could be undone by circumstances. Exhaustion nibbled at his thoughts, so he finally set aside the quill and let his head tip back. The fire cast dancing patterns on the walls. Outside the window, the faint roar of Rhaegal echoed in the night. Slowly, Jon stood and walked to the window, arms folded against the sill, peering out over the city's sloping rooftops. A glow from scattered torches spotted the dark. He wondered if the small folk ever gazed up and felt comforted by the sight of a dragon overhead, or if it only made them tremble, remembering the carnage wrought by another Targaryen not so long ago. Footsteps behind him made him turn. It was Sansa, quietly letting herself in. She offered the faintest of smiles, seeing he was not asleep. "I was returning to my room and saw the light under your door," she said softly. "I wanted to make sure you weren't working yourself to death." He let out a small breath. "I'm near it, I think." They stood side by side at the window, looking over the kingdom that had become their shared burden. She placed a hand on his arm. "You're forging something better, Jon, and you're not alone. We're all here, helping as we can." He looked at her with warmth in his eyes. "Thank you, Sansa." The words carried the quiet sincerity of one who knew how valuable that help was. They lingered in that moment of sibling closeness before she withdrew to retire, leaving him alone once more in the hush of the night. He returned to his desk, but the lure of rest tugged at him. It was late, and tomorrow held its own mountain of trials. Extinguishing the candles, he settled onto the bed. The deep darkness drew him in, and he let himself slip into it, hoping for dreamless sleep. Yet dreams came anyway. Shadows of flight and flashes of ghostly shapes, moving through a blizzard's gloom. He saw the Iron Throne, half melted, with Daenerys' figure in the distance. Her voice was lost on the wind, but her gaze seared him with sorrow. He tried to call out, tried to close the distance, but she vanished into swirling snow and ash. When he woke, the sky was still dark. The chamber felt cold, and sweat beaded on his brow. He sat up, pressing a hand to his face, trying to steady his breathing. The ghost of Daenerys never truly left him. Perhaps it never would. Eventually, dawn's light broke once more. He dressed more quickly this time, refusing to dwell too long on the half-remembered dream. Another day's challenges awaited. He found Sam pacing in the hallway, arms full of scrolls, eyes wide with worry. "Your Grace," Sam panted, almost dropping the stack, "there's a message from Old Town. They've offered to send an envoy to discuss the re-establishment of the Citadel's presence in King's Landing. We could have more maesters to help with record-keeping, healing, all sorts of tasks. It might lighten the load on each castle's personal maester." Jon welcomed the idea. That would be a boon. "Write them back immediately, Sam. Invite them. We could use more skilled healers, especially with winter on the horizon again. Maybe not this year, but soon." Sam's face brightened, relieved to see the king's approval. He shifted the scrolls. "Also, I found something in the archives about the lineage of Targaryens in the days of Aegon III. There might be some precedent for how dragons were managed in the realm. I thought it might be useful to you." Jon blinked. "Useful how?" "Well," Sam said, pushing up his slipping chain with a free hand, "there was a period when Targaryen kings tried to keep dragons from being seen as instruments of destruction, focusing instead on them as deterrents, symbols of royal authority, rather than simply war machines. They set restrictions on flights, feeding, that sort of thing. I imagine it didn't last long. Those were two lessons for us." Jon's brow furrowed, considering. If that helps people see Rhaegal as something other than a harbinger of doom, it might be worth exploring. "Thank you, Sam." "That's sane." Sam nodded eagerly. "I'll gather more information." They parted ways, and Jon headed for the throne room, heart weighed by the day's demands. The presence of the Iron Throne across the long hall still gave him a subtle unease. Guards stood in neat ranks, polished breastplates reflecting the torches. Courtiers were already filtering in, though not in great crowds. It was no formal audience day, but word traveled fast that the king might appear. He ascended the short steps to the throne, placed a hand on its arm. The swords had been hammered into straighter lines, the seat less jagged. Even so, it remained a potent symbol of conquest, a seat that had witnessed madness and ambition in equal measure. He lowered himself onto it, feeling the chill of metal through the fabric of his clothes. A hush fell among those present. The first matter was a small group of merchants petitioning for new shipping routes. Jon heard them out, consulting occasionally with a steward by his side about taxes. Next came a pair of knights disputing a claim to a minor keep that had belonged to a family extinguished by the war. He tried to mediate fairly, mindful of each man's arguments. It tested his patience, but he gave them a ruling that aimed for compromise. They left, stiff-backed, each uncertain if they'd won or lost. Then a messenger from the Stormlands arrived, recounting that Gendry was making progress with the bandits, but casualties had occurred. A few men wounded, some ruffians put to the sword. The roads were safer, if not entirely free of threat. Jon thanked him, relief tempered by concern. An hour passed in similar fashion before a herald announced a visitor from the north. Jon's heart quickened. Could it be one of the Mormonts, or perhaps a Karstark? But when the figure walked in, the stride was immediately familiar, tall, with a purposeful gait and auburn hair. It was Bronn, the Sellsword-turned lord, wearing a self-satisfied grin, flanked by two younger men in ill-fitting armor. Bronn approached, offering a bow that managed to look both mocking and obliging. His presence drew side eyes from the courtiers, who remembered how he once served House Lannister. He rose, giving Jon a lazy smile. "Your Grace, a pleasure as always. Apologies for dropping in unannounced, but I've been all over these realms ensuring my new lands aren't being plundered while I sleep." "Now." Jon's tone was neutral. "Lord Bronn, welcome. Is there an issue in your domain?" Bronn's grin flickered, replaced by a vaguely irritated expression. "A bit. Seems the Tarlis never much cared for me stepping in near Highgarden, and there's been talk that some upstart minor lord wants to reclaim bits of the estate I was granted." He shrugged. "I'm not one for politics, as you know, but I'd like the king's reassurance that my claim holds. We had a deal, after all." "Nice." Tyrion, who had slipped in near the dais, spoke before Jon could reply. "You had a deal with Cersei, if memory serves, and then another with me when we thought you'd kill me if I didn't meet your price." Bronn rolled his eyes. "Ancient history. The point is, I've got a piece of land that's mine by royal decree, but small lords keep testing me. I can handle most on my own, but I'd rather not spark an incident that you'll have to mop up later." Jon studied the man for a moment, recalling the shifting allegiances and bargains struck in those chaotic days. He also recognized that Bronn, while troublesome, could be an asset if managed properly. "Your claim remains as was proclaimed under the new regime. However, if these small lords feel aggrieved, they have a right to bring their case to the crown. If it's found that your claim infringes on older rights, we'll have to find a resolution." Bronn's mouth twisted into a half-frown. "Fair enough. I'm not looking to cheat anyone. I just want to make sure no one cheats me. I'll abide by your ruling." Jon gave a measured nod. "Then remain in the city for a time. We'll hear out the complaints and settle them. Until then, no violence beyond your lands." Bronn inclined his head. "Understood, Your Grace." He stepped back, glancing at Tyrion with a crooked smirk. "Might as well get comfortable in the capital then. You owe me a drink." Tyrion snorted softly. "You owe me an entire tavern by this point, but we'll see what can be done." As Bronn left, the throne room calmed, only for another minor matter to appear. Jon felt the minutes blur into hours, the weight of the throne pressing down on him. When at last the session ended, he stood, stepping away from the seat with a sense of relief. Tyrion followed him out, passing through the double doors into a quieter corridor. Davos and Sansa were waiting there, each with a look that spelled more burdens to come. Jon braced himself, and sure enough, Sansa explained that Yara Greyjoy had responded swiftly. She was on her way to King's Landing, expecting safe passage and a formal audience to discuss the Iron Islands' autonomy. The timing felt abrupt, but he knew there was no sense delaying. He gave instructions to see her well received at the gates and to provide guest chambers under watch, polite, but careful. Hours later, as the sun dipped behind the massive outline of the city's walls, Yara arrived, accompanied by a lean party of Ironborn. They rode in with an air of confidence, heads high, salt-stained leathers smelling of brine. Jon received them in the smaller council chamber, wishing to keep the conversation focused and private. Yara strode in, her dark hair pulled back, eyes sharp as a gull's, scanning the faces in the room. She stopped in front of Jon, crossing her arms. "It's been a while, Snow. Or Targaryen. Or is it both now?" Jon mustered a small smile. "Just Jon, or Your Grace, if you prefer the formalities." Yara gave a short laugh, not unkind. "I'm not fond of formalities, but I'll remember it's your fancy seat now. Still, we have business." Jon gestured for her to sit at the table. Sansa and Davos stood on either side, Brienne behind, Tyrion at Jon's right hand. Yara's companions remained standing at her back, expressions guarded. A hush settled. The flicker of candles lent the meeting a tense intimacy. Yara leaned forward, hands on the table's edge. "We fought beside you against the dead. We spilled blood and lost men. We did as was pledged when Daenerys Targaryen sought our help. Now I ask that the Iron Islands receive what was promised, the right to rule ourselves, free of the Iron Throne's meddling." Jon answered evenly, "I haven't forgotten. I'm prepared to honor that, but we need the Iron Islands as allies, not as an isolated domain that might turn on the rest of Westeros whenever it pleases." Her lips curled in a faint smirk. Why would we turn on you? We want no part in the petty squabbles of the mainland. We'd rather protect our seas, fish our waters, raid if we must to survive. But I'm no fool. I know you won't tolerate lawless raiding. So let's call it a deal. We raid abroad, not on Westerosi shores, and we remain your allies should you require a fleet. That's inner. Sansa's gaze hardened. Raid abroad, meaning the free cities, other innocents. Why should the crown condone that? Yara shrugged. It's our way. We've always been reavers. But times are changing, and maybe there's more profit in honest trade, if we can make it worth our while. The point is we want to stand apart from your laws, your lords, your taxes. In return, we offer friendship and ships if war comes. Venderamu. Jon exchanged a look with Tyrion. The dwarf nodded slightly, as if to say, this is your call. Jon turned back to Yara. You'll fly the flag of the Iron Islands. We won't impose taxes or decide your successions. But you'll not raid any realm that has treaties with Westeros, Essos, or otherwise. If you do, we can't protect you from the consequences. And if any Ironborn target our own shores, your leadership will be held accountable. Merci, na. Yara considered, eyes narrowing in calculation. After a moment, she extended a hand. Agreed. I can keep my people in line so long as we have prosperity in return. The day the Iron Islands starve, though, is the day all deals are off. Jon clasped her forearm. I understand. She leaned back, exhaling. Then let it be done. A grin tugged her lips. I'll drink to that. Tyrion cleared his throat. We'll formalize this in writing, with official seals. You'll leave with the documents that confirm your new status. Consider that your guarantee if any mainlander tries to question you. Mainlands. Yara inclined her head. I like official seals if it keeps half the lords off my back. They spent an hour drafting the terms. Sam called in to help with the language, ensuring it aligned with the records. As the last line was penned, Yara poured herself a cup of wine from a flask she carried. Ironborn brew, sharp with a salty tang. She raised it in a wry toast to the king. Jon, unused to the strong taste, had to struggle to keep from coughing as he swallowed a small mouthful. Yara laughed, a brief, genuine sound that eased the tension. For that moment, they seemed more like old comrades than rulers forging a new shape for Westeros. When the meeting ended, Yara departed with her retinue to settle in the guest chambers, promising to linger a few days before sailing home. Jon watched her go, wondering if this arrangement would hold, or if it was just one more fragile alliance in a realm full of them. But for now, it was another stitch mending a tear in Westeros. He had to believe it was worth doing. That night, he retreated once more to his quarters, arms and legs heavy. The day had been fruitful, but it had drained him. A meal was brought in, though he barely touched it, mind churning with thoughts of how the other lords would react to the Iron Islands' partial independence. He could almost hear their grumblings. More letters would flood in, more petitions, more demands. Yet he reminded himself, every day that passes without open war is a small victory. He stood at the window, letting the breeze tug at his hair. In the distance, a dragon's roar echoed across the night. It reminded him that, while so much had changed, one constant in his life now was Rhaegal. Together, they symbolized both hope and fear. Perhaps that was the nature of dragons and kings. A surge of longing coursed through him. A longing for simpler times, for the wall, for the camaraderie of the Night's Watch. But he'd left that life behind. Some part of him had died and been reborn. Now he was king, and the watch he kept was over the living, over peace, over a realm that had survived the threat of extinction only to struggle with the aftermath. He murmured into the darkness, "We'll make it right," though he wasn't entirely sure if he was speaking to Rhaegal, to Daenerys' memory, or to the ghosts of his own past. The wind carried his words away. He released a slow breath, turned from the window, and settled into the bed, letting the day slip from his weary mind. Tomorrow, he would rise again, greet the sun, shoulder the responsibilities of rule, and hope that each choice led Westeros a step further from the horrors they had all endured. Sleep came, heavy with fatigue, drifting through him like a slow tide. But somewhere in his dreams, he felt the warmth of a dragon's presence, and that faint glimmer of hope, flickering, fragile, but bright enough to guide him forward in the darkness. In that dream, he soared above the city on Rhaegal's back, seeing beyond the battered walls, beyond the scars. He saw a realm beginning anew, shaped by the ashes of war into something stronger, something kinder. And though the dream was fleeting, he held on to it as dawn whispered on the horizon. End. Daylight filtered into the royal chambers through high, narrow windows, casting diagonal stripes of sunlight across the cool stone floor. Jon rose from a fitful sleep and rubbed his eyes, pushing himself out of bed before any attendants could rush in and offer their services. He wanted a moment of solitude, an interval of quiet before he stepped once more into the swirl of politics and responsibility. Outside, the city was coming to life. The clink of metal-shod hooves echoed in the streets, and somewhere below the keep's walls, a trumpet signaled a changing of the watch. Jon heard the faint murmur of conversation from the hall, a steward instructing a servant to deliver fresh bread to the kitchens. Each day, the Red Keep had its routine, an endless cycle of chores and formalities, humming beneath the surface, like a great animal breathing in and out. He dressed methodically in a plain tunic of charcoal gray cloth, buckling his belt with steady fingers. He clipped Longclaw at his hip, an old habit he refused to break, even on days when he expected no threat. Before stepping out, he moved to the window, gazing over the courtyard far below. In the early sunlight, he caught a glimpse of Rhaegal's green silhouette perched atop a crumbled section of wall. The dragon's wings were half unfurled, warming in the gentle morning rays, and Jon could almost feel the deep resonance of Rhaegal's breathing. It tugged at him, that promise of freedom in the skies. But duty pulled in the opposite direction, an invisible chain. He exhaled, took one more look at the city, then left his room to face whatever waited for him. A short walk brought him to the council chamber. Already, a low buzz of discussion wafted into the corridor. Tyrion, Davos, Sansa, and Sam were present, along with a few lesser officials who had come to deliver reports. Tyrion was pacing around the table, his gaze darting between several scrolls. When Jon entered, everyone paused, dipping their heads in deference. He motioned for them to carry on. The chamber was lit by morning sun pouring through two tall, narrow windows, making the dust motes swirl in the air. Tyrion greeted Jon with a faint smile. "Good morning, Your Grace," he said, voice polite but tinged with the dryness of long habit. "We were just discussing an unexpected visitor. It seems there's a party from the Vale waiting in the outer yard, accompanied by Lord Royce." Jon set his jaw, recalling the letter that mentioned the Vale felt overlooked. He must have come to address his grievances in person. Sansa's expression was guarded. "I know Lord Royce well enough. He's not a man given to rash displays of temper, but he's fiercely protective of the Vale's interests. We'll need to hear him out properly. He's traveled a long way." Davos cleared his throat. "He arrived at dawn, so he must be pushed his men hard. That suggests urgency." Jon nodded, stepping to the table. He glanced over some scattered notes about harvest tallies, Stormland bandit updates, and the official drafts for the Ironborn treaty. His gaze lingered a moment on that last one. Fresh ink confirming Yara's partial independence. He wondered how that news would land in the Vale. The entire realm was a patchwork of old loyalties and new deals, and every concession risked igniting fresh demands. "All right," he said quietly. "We'll receive him in the throne room. Best not to appear as though we're hiding from official audiences. Tyrion, please see to the preparations." Tyrion nodded. "Shall I gather the lesser lords, or keep it small?" Jon considered. "We'll keep the gathering moderate. The lords from the Crownlands might as well attend. It's useful for them to hear the Vale's concerns, too." He straightened. "Let's not waste time. We'll greet him as soon as the hall is ready." "No." They departed, parting ways in the corridors. Tyrion and Sam branched off to make final notes, while Davos volunteered to ensure Lord Royce was shown suitable hospitality before the meeting. Sansa walked beside Jon for a few strides, her hand brushing his elbow lightly. "You're handling it well," she said in a low voice. "I'll respect that you see him promptly. The Vale prides itself on courtesy as much as strength." Jon acknowledged her words with a silent nod. His mind churned with questions of how to appease Lord Royce without promising more than the crown could deliver. He felt wearied by the thought of yet another negotiation. But that was the nature of being king, a constant balancing act on shifting sand. In the throne room, flickering braziers dispelled the morning shadows, the vaulted ceiling disappearing into dim heights. Jon ascended the dais, placing a hand on the arm of the iron throne. The seat's hammered swords glinted in the light, forming a subdued and less ragged shape than the original abomination that once stood there. Guards in polished helms lined the walls. A herald stepped forward, and after a brief pause to ensure all was in order, banged a staff on the floor. The heavy doors opened, revealing Lord Royce striding in, flanked by half a dozen of his knights. He wore a thick cloak, pinned by a bronze clasp, signifying the heritage of his house, and his square jaw was set in determination. Jon noted the steel in Royce's gaze as the man approached, then bowed. "Your Grace," Royce said, voice echoing in the hall. "I come from the Vale on urgent business. May I speak freely?" Jon gave a measured nod. "Of course, Lord Royce. We welcome your counsel." Royce straightened. "The Vale has stood by the crown through treachery and war. We fought against the Boltons. We answered the call in the Great War. And we aided in the final push against the remnants of Cersei's forces. Yet, in recent months, we feel that our contributions have been overlooked. The Val's trade routes face new taxes, and the roads through the Mountains of the Moon are poorly guarded. We've suffered multiple raids from outlaws, bandits who find refuge in the passes. While the Crown has sent patrols to other regions, we've received none." "Nanip." Jon listened carefully, aware of the subtle tension that filled the room. Sansa stood behind him to one side, expression neutral. Tyrion lingered nearby, watchful. Jon inclined his head. "We appreciate your loyalty and sacrifice, Lord Royce. Our resources are stretched thin across the entire kingdom. The Stormlands, the Crownlands, even the Riverlands, they all suffer bandit attacks. We are doing our best to deploy forces where the threat is greatest." Royce's lips pressed into a line. "You forget the Vale stands as the gateway to the north. We keep that path secure. We cannot do so with half our men exhausted and our farmland threatened. We require immediate assistance, soldiers or coin to hire more men ourselves." Jon glanced briefly at Sansa, who gave a subtle nod. They had anticipated these complaints. "Very well," he said, voice calm. "We'll arrange for a contingent of crown troops to reinforce the roads in the Vale. We also have been organizing localized militias in troubled areas. If you can coordinate with these efforts, we'll see to it that some portion of those militias are Vale-born. That way, they'll know the terrain." "Namsun." Royce's shoulders loosened fractionally. "That would help. But we also need to discuss the matter of taxes. The Vale is burdened by new levies on grain exports, while I hear talk of the Iron Islands receiving concessions." Jon felt a tightness coil in his stomach. Here it was, exactly as he'd feared. That arrangement with the Iron Islands is unique. It's a measure to secure peace in a region that has long been rebellious, especially after they contributed men and ships to the Great War. "I understand your frustration, but the Vale situation is different. You remain fully a part of the realm. Our tax structure is still stabilizing after the devastation." "Nadine?" Royce's stare hardened. "So we see the Iron Islands granted freedoms, while the loyal Vale is saddled with heavier burdens." Sansa took a step forward, her tone clear but not unkind. "The Crown is not granting the Iron Islands an escape from all obligations, Lord Royce. They still must answer if they raid our lands or break treaties. Their arrangement is less beneficial than it might seem from outside. They can't rely on the Crown's protection if they provoke foreign powers. We recognize that appearances can be misleading, which is why we ask the Vale to trust us. As soon as the Crown's finances are steadier, we'll review the tax rates across the entire realm. For now, every region must share the load." Royce's gaze flicked to Sansa, and the flicker of respect was clear. He inclined his head slightly. We do trust the king, and we hold the Stark name in high regard, Lady Sansa. But the Vale's patience is not without limits. Jon descended one step from the throne. Nor is mine, Lord Royce. I've made no secret that I did not crave this crown. I do it because our people need stability. The Vale is part of that. Give me time and cooperation, and I promise we'll find a fair solution. His voice remained steady, but he let a quiet intensity seep through. He was not just the Stark's brother or an accidental monarch. He was the one who held the realm together. Royce bowed once more, this time with less rigidity. Then I shall take your words back to the Lords of the Vale. I appreciate that you've heard me, Your Grace. Jon motioned to a steward. You and your men will be housed in comfortable quarters while you remain in the city. I invite you to stay a few days, if needed, to finalize plans with our Master of War regarding militia deployment. Royce murmured his thanks, turned on his heel, and left with his knights. The heavy doors boomed shut behind them, leaving an echo in the hall. Jon felt the tension in his neck. Another crisis managed, though not entirely resolved. Tyrion let out a small breath. That went better than expected, though I suspect he still harbors some bitterness. Likely, Jon said. We'll deal with it one day at a time. They moved to the council chamber, where smaller matters awaited. Sansa, Tyrion, Sam, and Davos joined him around the map-laden table. Servants brought in a light midday meal. Bread, cold meats, and a thin vegetable broth. Jon ate sparingly, his mind too preoccupied with the swirl of concerns. As he sipped water, Tyrion began detailing the latest communications from the Riverlands. A few lesser lords squabbled over water rights of all things. With farmland still recovering from flooding caused by old battles, Davos updated them on Gendry's progress in the Stormlands. The bandits had been largely scattered, though a core group remained elusive in the forested hills. Brienne arrived mid-session to report that the roads between King's Landing and Rosby were safer, thanks to patrols, but local villagers still lived in fear. Jon listened with quiet resolve, each new problem weaving into a tapestry that threatened to choke the realm. The magnitude never seemed to lessen. The moment one region found relief, another faced disaster. For a moment, he let his thoughts drift to Rhaegal, or to the memory of Ghost, or even to the distant calm of Winterfell's Godswood, which he missed like a phantom limb. But a king had no refuge in daydreams. He returned his attention to the conversation, giving direction where he could. When the meeting paused, Sam cleared his throat. Your Grace, I'd like to request some time to examine the library in the Red Keep. There are volumes there dating back to the days of King Jaehaerys, records that might shed light on the best ways to unify a fractured kingdom. I found references to a period known as the Conciliations, a time when the Targaryens tried to foster good relations after a civil war. Jon agreed, seeing the spark of excitement in Sam's eyes. Yes, of course. If you find anything that might help us avoid further bloodshed, it's worth the effort. We'll ensure you have access to the entire library. Tyrion, can we spare a few scribes to assist him? Tyrion nodded. Certainly. We have scribes languishing with nothing to do but copy birth records and property deeds. They can help Sam search for relevant texts. Sam beamed. Thank you, Your Grace. With that, the day's official business concluded, though Jon felt certain his real work would continue long into the evening. For a while they all drifted into separate tasks. Sansa answering letters, Davos working with the captain of the Crown's Guard, Tyrion conferring with some envoys who sought commercial licenses. Jon, seeking a breath of air, found himself in a narrow courtyard lined with pomegranate trees, their leaves rustling softly. The midday sun slanted through vines creeping along the walls, forming shifting patterns on the cobblestones. He rested a moment against a low stone bench, letting the quiet hush of the courtyard soothe his pounding temples. A faint breeze carried the scent of citrus, mingling with the dryness of sun-baked stone. The warmth on his face felt almost unnatural after so many years spent bracing against the cold winds of the north. But he recognized that, for many in the city, this climate was normal. Another reminder that Westeros was vast and varied. Footsteps approached. Brienne paused a respectful distance away, her armor gleaming. Your Grace, she said. voice as level as always. "Apologies for intruding, but there's a matter I must raise." Jon nodded, gesturing for her to sit if she wished. Though he knew Brienne seldom seemed comfortable in a casual posture. She remained standing, helmet cradled under her arm. "It's about the rumors spreading through the city. People speak of a dragon in the skies, yes. But they also whisper about your heritage. Some say you might be the second coming of the Mad King. Others that you'll be the wise King Jaehaerys reborn. It stirs both hope and fear." Then, Jon closed his eyes briefly, a flicker of exasperation in his chest. "I can't stop them from whispering. Let them talk." Brienne's face remained solemn. "I know. But I wondered if you'd considered addressing the people directly, making some statement to reassure them. Sometimes, facing rumors head-on can dispel the worst of them." "Now, Denzero." He gazed at her, recalling how she once followed him in battle, how she'd served the Starks loyally. "I'll consider it, Brienne. But I'm wary of playing into the theatrics of the throne. The more I try to prove I'm not like my grandfather, the more people might wonder if I'm hiding some madness." He sighed. "Thank you for letting me know." She dipped her head. "I serve you as I served Lady Catelyn. If you need me, I'm at your command." After she left, Jon lingered a moment longer, absorbing the hush of the courtyard. Then he pushed himself to stand, deciding to visit the city walls for a clearer perspective. He made his way through the keep's corridors, guards saluting. Soon he reached a stone staircase, spiraling upward to the battlements. Up there, the wind was stronger, whipping at his hair, carrying the brine of the sea. He walked along the rampart, gazing down at the city, sprawled below. The harbor was alive with ships, sails flapping as they came and went. The bustle of trade was a sign of recovery, or so Tyrion said. Restored commerce meant more taxes flowing into the crown's coffers, which in turn meant more resources to rebuild. Still, the city's skyline bore scars: blackened ruins, scaffolding, half-finished towers. A flicker of movement overhead caught his eye. Rhaegal glided across the sky, a majestic shadow against the bright dome, wings outstretched. Jon felt a pang in his chest that was half pride, half sorrow. The presence of a dragon made him a symbol of both hope and terror, something more than human, though all he wanted was to serve. As he watched, Rhaegal descended toward the wide field outside the city walls, possibly to rest or hunt. The sight reminded Jon of those fleeting moments of freedom in the air. He resolved that, after the day's tasks were done, he might fly again. He needed that sense of release. But the day carried on with merciless demands. Word arrived that the men sent to track down the Stormland bandits had captured a handful of them. A quick hearing would be required. Some might be common criminals driven by desperation, others hardened outlaws who thrived on chaos. Jon delegated the matter to Davos and a few trustworthy knights, instructing them to be fair yet firm. Another raven brought news from the Riverlands about petty lords stirring trouble. Tyrion grumbled that they were likely testing the new king's resolve. Meanwhile, Sansa oversaw the distribution of seeds and plowshares to certain ravaged villages around King's Landing. All of it was done in the shadow of the throne. 1,000 small steps to rebuild a broken realm. By late afternoon, the Red Keep's corridors felt stifling. Jon decided to slip away to the field where Rhaegal often perched. He alerted only a couple of guards, not wanting a retinue. A sense of anticipation built in his chest as he walked past the gate. Sure enough, Rhaegal was there, crouched near a cluster of gnarled trees, talons ripping into the earth. At Jon's approach, the dragon lifted his head, nostrils flaring. He let out a low rumble that reverberated in Jon's bones. Jon ran his palm along the warm scales of Rhaegal's flank, taking a moment to connect, to find that shared bond. The dragon watched him with glowing eyes, a living embodiment of ancient magic. When Jon mounted, the heat radiating from Rhaegal's body was palpable even through the leather. With a powerful thrust of his hind legs, Rhaegal launched skyward, wings beating the air in heavy strokes. The ground fell away in a rush. Jon's heart pounded, fear and elation merging. He'd never quite grown accustomed to the surge of flight, though each time, A part of him yearned to simply keep flying, to abandon the weight of the world below. They soared above King's Landing, the rooftops shrinking to a patchwork of red tile and gray stone. The wind roared past Jon's ears, tugging at his cloak. For a few precious minutes he circled the city, glimpsing the sprawl of communities outside the walls, farmland beyond, and the glittering sea stretching endlessly to the horizon. High above the thrumming pulse of civilization, he felt small and unburdened. He guided Rhaegal gently, urging him to bank toward the coast, then circle back. In the distance, he spotted ships from the Iron Islands moored at the harbor, Yara's vessels that had brought her to finalize the treaties. He wondered if she was on the deck, looking skyward, or if she was in some alehouse regaling men with stories of the open sea. Rhaegal's flight was swift, each beat of the dragon's wings a rhythmic thunder. They descended eventually, gliding toward the outskirts beyond the black water. Jon caught glimpses of farmers pausing in their fields to gawk at the sight overhead, fear and awe mingling on their faces. He reminded himself that he must be cautious. One accidental burst of dragonfire could spark panic. But Rhaegal showed no sign of aggression, only the primal grace of a creature at home in the clouds. At last, Jon guided him back to the same clearing, landing with a tremor that shook Jon's bones. He dismounted, patting Rhaegal's side. The dragon huffed, releasing a smoky breath. In the waning light, Rhaegal's green scales shimmered like polished jade. Jon stepped away, letting the creature move freely. Night was approaching, the sky turning from blue to a palette of pink and orange. The realm seemed so peaceful from above, yet he knew the tensions simmering below were anything but. Reluctantly, he made his way back through the gates, the guards bowing as he passed. He returned to the Red Keep, where the night's final obligations waited. He took a light supper in the privacy of a small antechamber off the throne room, a bowl of stew and some stale bread. Hunger lingered in him, yet his appetite was never quite strong these days. As he ate, Tyrion appeared, carrying 2 goblets of wine and an air of caution. "Your Grace," Tyrion said, offering a goblet. "Thought you might need something stronger than stew." Jon waved it off initially. "I've never been fond of relying on wine to ease my burdens, Tyrion." Tyrion shrugged with a knowing grin. "It's a small mercy, not a cure." He set the goblet down near Jon anyway, then sipped from his own. "You looked freer in the sky, if only briefly." Jon's gaze flickered. "I did feel freer, but it doesn't last." Tyrion studied him, then leaned against the table. "This is the life you've taken on. If it's any consolation, your regality grows on you more each day." Jon managed a soft snort of laughter. "I'm not sure I want to be regal. Just a man trying to hold the realm together." "Debrasel." Tyrion's voice softened. "Sometimes that's what a king must be. The realm has known too many who craved power for power's sake. Perhaps it's a relief to finally have one who doesn't want it at all." Jon said nothing, letting the words settle. He finished his stew and nodded his thanks. Tyrion lingered for a moment, eyes distant, as if recalling ghosts of kings past. Then he left Jon to his thoughts, footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. Alone, Jon tended to the day's remaining letters by candlelight. There was a message from Tormund Giantsbane, delivered by a circuitous route through the north, informing him that the free folk were preparing for the onset of cold in the wild lands beyond the wall. Tormund described new game trails, fresh hunts, and scattered rumors of stray wights left behind in the deep crags, though Tormund believed such tales were exaggerated. Still, the note reminded Jon that though the Night King was gone, the far north remained a place of mystery and potential danger. Jon smiled faintly at Tormund's coarse language and straightforward style. At least some things in this world remained refreshingly unadorned. He penned a quick response, urging Tormund to remain vigilant. Then he turned to another scroll, from a minor merchant house in Bravos, seeking trade concessions at King's Landing's docks. The complexities of foreign negotiations threatened to drown him. Nonetheless, he read and scribbled notes, setting aside the rest for Tyrion's counsel in the morning. The candle's flame shrank as the hours wore on. Outside, he occasionally heard the flap of wings, Rhaegal passing overhead, or perhaps roosting on some ledge of the keep. Each time it brought him a strange sense of comfort, knowing the dragon watched over the city in its own way. Eventually he rose, mind foggy with fatigue. He shrugged off his cloak and boots in his chamber, longing for the oblivion of sleep. Yet he hesitated at the window, peering out over the city. From this vantage, the scattering of lanterns in the streets resembled dim stars. The harbor gate was lit by a few torches, revealing the silhouettes of dockworkers unloading late ships. The city never fully slept. It only slowed, like a creature resting between breaths. Jon wondered how many people below whispered rumors about their new king, about the dragon overhead, about the possibility that the realm might at last know lasting peace. He allowed himself a moment's hope. They had survived the White Walkers, triumphed over the undead threat, and ended the grip of tyrants on the Iron Throne. If the living could stand side by side in that bleakest hour, then perhaps they could build a better tomorrow. But the road to that future was strewn with fear, resentment, and old wounds. Daenerys' dream of breaking the wheel lingered in his mind. The wheel was indeed broken, but the pieces still cluttered the ground, sharp and capable of cutting anyone who stepped upon them carelessly. Jon's role was to clear those shards away, or at least arrange them into some new design that might allow the realm to heal. The night air was mild, carrying the echo of gulls circling the distant harbor. A pang of memory struck him, the cry of ravens at Castle Black, the howling wind across the wall, the stark white emptiness of the far north. That was another life, belonging to a man who had not yet died and come back, who had not yet learned of his true parentage. He sometimes wondered if that younger Jon Snow would recognize him now. Weighed down by a crown he never desired, he turned away from the window, slipping into bed, exhaustion nesting in every muscle. Outside, King's Landing continued its subdued murmur. Some revelers lingering in taverns, a few watchmen patrolling the ramparts, the quiet footsteps of those who lived in the shadows. He closed his eyes, drifting toward sleep, half hearing the distant call of a dragon. It stirred old anxieties and new devotions. For a brief instant, he dreamt of Winterfell, the courtyard under a pale sun, Ghost bounding across fresh snow, Sansa laughing with Arya at some childhood jest. The dream dissolved, merging into formless images. He awoke early, a faint golden light creeping through the shutters. Stretching, he rose and splashed his face with cool water. Another day beckoned, another test of his resolve. He dressed with minimal fuss, fastening the simpler black cloak at his shoulders. He walked the corridors without escort, greeting servants who shuffled by with milk or baskets of laundry. The castle was in that brief lull between the night's lingering stillness and the morning's clamor. In the council chamber, Tyrion was already at the table, sipping black tea, a mound of parchments in front of him. He rubbed his eyes when Jon entered, gesturing at the seat across. "Good morning, Your Grace," he said, voice rasping with fatigue. "I've compiled the items that need your immediate attention. We've had a raven from the Westerlands, more complaints about taxes, a letter from Gendry, who believes the bandit threat is nearly under control, and a polite inquiry from Yara asking if you're serious about letting her leave soon." No. Jon settled into the chair, ignoring the pinch of soreness in his back. "She's free to depart whenever she pleases. I won't hold her here. Has she asked for an official farewell ceremony or something?" Tyrion chuckled softly. "Apparently not. She just wants confirmation that the papers she carries are binding and recognized. Let's finalize them and wish her a swift journey. The fewer lords hear about her special terms, the better. Or we'll have a line of them at the door." "Nenesto." Jon nodded, glancing at the first parchment. "And the Westerlands? Let me guess. They want us to reduce taxes again." Tyrion shrugged. "They claim their gold mines continue to yield less than in the past. They're worried about repaying debts incurred during the wars, another petition for leniency." Jon inhaled deeply. "We'll do what we can, but we have to maintain enough revenue to keep the realm secure. Perhaps we can extend the timeline of their payments instead of cutting the amount. That might soothe them." "No, Tyrion scribbled a note, lips pursed. "Pragmatic. I'll handle the negotiations." So began another slog through the labyrinth of governance. Lords from the Crown lands arrived to confirm their share of supplies for winter. A handful of knights wanted to show off new banners in the king's presence. A group of merchants pressed for lower tariffs in exchange for their loyalty. The hours piled up. At midday, Sansa appeared to update Jon on the conversation she'd had with Lord Royce and how the Vale's men would be deployed within a fortnight. She seemed cautiously optimistic, though she warned that Royce could turn prickly if he believed the crown was dragging its feet. Somewhere amid the swirl of duties, Yara Greyjoy presented herself to the throne room. Her retinue was smaller now, just a couple of Ironborn who looked eager to return to the sea. Jon, standing at the foot of the dais, handed her the parchment bearing the royal seal. "This confirms the terms we agreed upon," he said, his tone formal. "You'll have your autonomy, but the Iron Islands remain our allies." Yara took the parchment with a small grin. "Fine. Q. If it ensures we can do as we please, without every mainlander looking over our shoulder, I'll take it." The sea calls. "Nemisharti." She glanced around the throne room, a cynical light in her eye. "Good luck, Snow. Or Targaryen. Or both. You'll need it strapped to that chair." Jon's voice was quiet. "I know." "Safe journey, Yara." She bowed in her brusque way, turned and marched out, her boots thudding on the polished floor. Tyrion exhaled at Jon's side. One crisis settled. For now. Jon merely hummed in response, wondering if the Ironborn arrangement would plant seeds for future discontent. He'd done what he believed was honorable, fulfilling a promise made when the world faced extinction. Even if it stirred envy among the lords, he had to stand by it. A king without honor was no king worth following. As dusk approached, a new summons arrived from Davos, who asked Jon to attend a small gathering of local knights in the training yard. They were men who had fought in the last battles of the siege and had since tried to maintain order in the battered neighborhoods. Word had it, they sought official recognition from the crown. Jon, flanked by a pair of guards, stepped into the yard. Lanterns on poles cast dancing light across dusty ground. About 10 knights stood at attention, their armor mismatched, bearing the scrapes of long service. Davos inclined his head to Jon, then gestured to the men. "They call themselves the Knights' Bulwark," Davos said in a gruff aside. "A bit pompous if you ask me, but they've done good work protecting the small folk. They want to join the crown's official ranks. Maybe you can see them tested." Jon walked the line, meeting each man's gaze. Some were barely out of boyhood, others graying. One knight had an old gash across his brow. Another limped slightly, yet there was sincerity in their eyes. Jon remembered how the Night's Watch was composed of outcasts, bastards, and criminals. Yet they had found purpose and brotherhood. He didn't want to dismiss these men if they truly aimed to protect the people. He spoke, his voice carrying in the stillness. "Davos tells me you've been patrolling the streets, aiding the Golden Cloaks, defending the helpless from thieves and raiders. Why do you come to me now?" "Now?" An older knight at the center, bearded and stern, answered respectfully. "Because we believe in what you did during the Great War, Your Grace. We believe a king who understands sacrifice is worth following. We want to be recognized so we can expand, recruit more honest men to guard the city. The crown can't be everywhere at once." Jon surveyed them. He realized that means discipline, accountability. You won't be some private force. You'll answer to the crown's laws, stand trials if you break them. The man inclined his head. "We understand. We only ask for a chance to prove ourselves. Let us serve. Now see." Jon's silence stretched for a few heartbeats, memory tugging at him. Men standing along the battlements of Castle Black. Frightened but resolute. The need for dedicated protectors was real. If these knights were sincere, they could be a valuable asset. He glanced at Davos, who offered a subtle nod of support. "Very well," Jon said. "Show me your strength, your code of honor. I'll have Captain Villar of the Crown's Guard put you through trials for a fortnight. If you stand up to scrutiny, you'll be recognized as an auxiliary force under the Crown's command." A murmur of relief and gratitude went through the group. The older knight bowed deeper. "We won't fail you, Your Grace." Jon signaled their dismissal, then turned to Davos. "Keep an eye on them. We can't afford another band of sellswords or mercenaries forming their own agendas. Davos nodded. I'll keep them in line. Night had fully fallen by the time Jon returned to his chambers. The Red Keep's halls were lit by torches, their glow reflecting on polished suits of armor displayed along the corridors. Tiredness draped his body, but he forced himself to keep his stride steady. There was always the possibility of an urgent summons, or a crisis flaring in some distant region. He couldn't let exhaustion show too plainly, for the king's demeanor often influenced the morale of those around him. Inside his room, he found a sealed letter on the table. Curiosity piqued. He broke the wax. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature read, Mira Reed, a name he hadn't thought about in a while. The letter was brief, stating that she was still in the north, scouting the edges of the swamps near Greywater Watch, watching for any sign of southern infiltration or leftover horrors from the war. She wrote that the land was mostly quiet, though some lizard lions had grown bolder. She asked how the realm fared, and whether the king might remember his old allies. A pang of memory tugged at Jon. He recalled Mira's fierce loyalty to Bran. In all of the chaos, he'd lost track of her. Now she wrote to him as king, though the tone was not deferential, but friendly. He penned a short reply, thanking her for her vigilance, assuring her that the realm was rebuilding, and inviting her to visit King's Landing if ever she wished. Then he placed the finished missive aside, letting out a slow breath. Sometimes, in these quiet moments, he sensed the unspoken connections that laced across Westeros. People who had fought side by side in the long night, or who had once shared hardships. Those bonds might be the realm's best hope now. Stronger than any single crown could guarantee. Outside, the muffled sounds of nightlife continued. Distant laughter, a scuffle of boots, the faint cry of a vendor trying to sell hot pies. Jon stripped off his cloak, unbuckled Longclaw, and draped it over a chair. He allowed himself to sink onto the bed, face buried in his hands for a moment. The day was done, but tomorrow would bring another storm of letters, petitions, judgments, and alliances to uphold or deny. He felt the ache in his muscles, the dryness in his eyes. He rose once more, drawn to the window. The sky was cloudless, thousands of stars glittering over the city. In the far distance, he imagined he saw Rhaegal's shadow pass across the moon. Perhaps it was a trick of his weary mind, or perhaps the dragon truly soared in the dark. Jon thought of the years when dragons were myths, and now a living one perched at his call, a symbol of rebirth and destruction alike. He pressed a palm to the window's ledge, stone cool beneath his hand. His thoughts shifted to the north again, to Bran's cryptic messages, to Tormund's roving freefolk, to Mira in the swamps. A part of him yearned to ride northward, to breathe the icy wind and walk among the pines. But he had chosen this path, or it had chosen him. The duty to the entire realm outweighed his longing for home. With a deep breath, he promised himself that if the realm found peace, he would one day return to Winterfell, even if only for a short visit. The North was in his blood, Stark as well as Targaryen, and the direwolf in him howled softly in the night. He let the hush of the moment lull him, leaning his head against the window frame, eyes slipping shut. Sleep would come soon enough, and with it, the swirl of dreams. Some gentle, some nightmarish. Beyond the walls, King's Landing breathed on, a living entity of hopes and fears. Its future rested on him as much as he rested within it. Tomorrow he would rise again, and the cycle would continue. Negotiations, solutions, flights on Dragonback, sorrow for the past, hope for the future. Each small step might mend the wounds that had torn Westeros asunder. If he could hold on long enough, if he could keep the realm stitched together, perhaps they would all survive to see the shape of a new age. He turned from the window at last, extinguishing the candle on his table. Darkness settled over the chamber, broken only by moonlight. In that wavering silver glow, he slipped under the covers. He closed his eyes, exhaling the burdens of the day. In the silence, he thought of the vow he once lived by, on the wall. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. That vow still held meaning, though the uniform had changed, and the battlefield was now a throne. He would guard them, as best he could, for as long as breath and honor remained in him. And outside, far above the city's winding streets, the dragon soared, its emerald wings cutting through the night,